Where am I? There we are. Okay, just double checking to see if we're recording. This one we're going to do properties of solutions. And so for this lab, we're going to test what's in solutions and what are some tests that we're going to look forward to. One of the tests that we're going to do is for the chloride ion. And so we're going to use standards for right now just to see what we expect when we do our actual test for these individual substances. So if we're looking for starches, we're going to use iodine. If we're looking for the chloride ion, we're going to use silver nitrate to precipitate that chloride ion out. And then for the test for sugar and glucose, for glucose, we're going to use the Benedict solution. So first and foremost, before we start our actual experiment, we need to see what we're going to look for, and we need to see what to expect in order to determine whether the tests are positive for a starch, chloride ion, or for sugar, or if of course we see nothing, then we will consider those tests to be negative for those respective substances that we're looking for. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and get my starch solution, and I'm going to add a little bit to my beaker, and then again I'm going to get here my chloride solution, my sodium chloride solution, and I'm going to put it on a beaker here. I don't want to mess up the stock solution, so that's why I have a beaker with each of those. And the lab has us to actually record them. To label our solutions, but I'm not going to label my solutions just because I'm the only one here, and so there's no mode of confusion, right? But normally you would label them because we would only have one set. All right. So now that I've poured all my solutions, the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at our chloride test, right? Okay, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to measure out 3 milliliters of water, and this will be our standard. And here, the only reason why we're measuring out 3 milliliters of water is so that we don't have to use a continuously use a graduated cylinder. And so we're going to measure out approximately 3 milliliters of water. And again, like I said, the only reason why we're doing this is so that this can be our standard, so that we don't have to use a graduated cylinder. And like I said, all of these are qualitative purposes. They're not for quantity. So that means we're just trying to see what actually happens, right? We're not after any kind of measurements. And so that's approximately 3 milliliters of water. So we're going to use this for our standard. The first test that we're going to do is we're going to get sodium chloride. And we're going to, so this will be the first test. And it'll be our sodium chloride test. So we're going to get some salt water, in other words. And here we have a pipette. And let me go ahead and zoom out, sorry. So here we're going to test, we're going to pour out approximately 3 milliliters. So we're going to kind of measure it, eyeball it, and make sure that it's about the same length. The same height of the test tube. And as you can see, pretty much same height, right? So that's about 3 milliliters. And so now what we're going to do for our test is, in order for us to test for the chloride ion, we're going to determine, we're going to add 2 drops of the silver nitrate, and we're going to stir, and we're going to determine what we observe, right? So we're going to get our silver nitrate solution, right? We're going to add 2 drops. And of course, normally you would use 2 hands for this. Okay, so let me get some. I'm going to add 2 drops. I'm going to go ahead and move to the side so that you all can see. So we're going to add 1 and 2. All right, so we're going to add 2 drops. We're going to go ahead and stir. Right. And so right now, so as you can see, we got little flakes in there of our precipitate. And so for this first test, whoops, let's go ahead and zoom it in. And then let me get it closer to you all. If you can see, we have a precipitate at the bottom. So this is when two clear solutions or two soluble solutions come into contact. And if you notice, you can hopefully see the little flakes of that precipitate. So that's what we expect when we look for that chloride ion. We're going to see if there is some chloride ion present in the addition of the silver nitrate. Once we add the silver nitrate, we should expect a precipitate to occur. Okay. Okay, for the next test, we're going to use another test tube, and we're going to do the starch test. And so for this, we're going to measure out also, we're going to measure out 3 milliliters. Just going to give it a little shake. And so here, we're going to add approximately about the same amount to our test tube. Eyeball it. Whoops. That's about 3 milliliters. And then I'm going to go ahead and return it. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some iodine. Let's go ahead and move it a little bit to the side. I'm going to add some iodine. And you got to be careful with iodine. Definitely toxic. And so we're going to add 2 to 3 drops, and then we're going to determine a change. 1, 2, and 3. So now let's go ahead and close it. And now we're going to go ahead and stir. All right, so in the addition of let me zoom it in a little bit closer. What you're supposed to be looking here for the iodine test is that as soon as the starch hits, you should see a hint of blue showing. So just go ahead and focus. Here goes a drop. And if you notice, the solution does turn. The next test that we're going to do is the glucose test. And so for the glucose test, what we're going to do is we're going to add 3 milliliters of our glucose solution, 10%, and then we're going to add 3 milliliters of our Benedict solution. And then we're going to place the test tube in a water bath and heat for about 5 minutes, and then we're going to record our observations, all right, to determine our positive test results for glucose. So we're going to get our glucose solution. Let's go ahead and get rid of our iodine solution. And so we get our pipette, and we get our test tube, our beaker with our glucose solution, 10%. We're going to go ahead and add about 3 milliliters. I think we should have maybe a little bit more. I think we should be good there. We'll return our glucose solution. And if you notice, we're about the same height. Okay, so now we're gonna add about approximately 3 milliliters of our Benedict solution to our test tube. And so let's go ahead and get another one. Here I'm gonna bring out another test tube. We're gonna add about 3 milliliters, whoops. And once we add our 3 milliliters, then we're gonna go ahead and transfer those 3 milliliters. So a little bit more. And that's about it. We're gonna go ahead now and add our Benedict solution into our glucose solution. Okay. Now then what we're gonna do is we're gonna go to our warm bath, yeah, and we're gonna heat the test tube in our bath. Okay, give me 1 second. Okay, so here we have a boiling bath, and so it's just starting to boil. I started noticing the bubbles come up. It's not intensely boiling, but it will in a bit. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna set it in this bath, and we're gonna go ahead and place our test tube, submerge it, and we're gonna place it in this bath, and we're gonna heat for about 5 minutes. After placing the Benedict solution and glucose solution into boiling water for about 5 minutes, this is the positive test to notice that there is glucose in there. If you notice, we started off with the Benedict solution, which is a hint of a blue, and then we have our glucose solution. And then in order for us to determine that there is sugar in there, once we mix the two and put it in boiling water for about boiling water bath for about 5 minutes, you can notice the color change. Here we notice a yellow hint of a yellow color. So anytime we put Benedict solution into a test, we put it in boiling water, if it does turn yellow, that means that there is glucose present. Okay. For our next step, we're actually going to measure out 10 milliliters of our starch solution, sodium chloride solution, and glucose solution. We're going to measure out 10 mLs, and we're going to go ahead and put it in the speaker. And then what we're going to do is we're going to now get our dialysis tubing, which is located right here. We're going to take it out, tie a knot on one end, and then add about 20 milliliters of that solution into the dialysis tubing. And then I'm going to make a knot at the top, and then we're going to place it into this 250 milliliter beaker. We're going to first rinse it out with some water, distilled water. And then what we're going to do is we're going to completely submerge the dialysis tubing in water. And then we're going to submerge it for about, initially, we're going to take our calculations, and then we'll submerge it initially, and then after 30 minutes, and then again, I believe initially 30 minutes, and that's it. So let's go ahead and measure out. Okay, so we're gonna measure out our 10 milliliters of each solution. So we're gonna start off with the starch. I'm just gonna go ahead and mix and measure our 10 milliliter solution. Now we'll need some more, so we'll go ahead and get some more out. After measuring our 10 milliliters, hopefully you can see, we're at the 10 milliliters of our starch solution. We're going to replace our starch up there. We're going to get our beaker. We're going to go ahead and add our solution to our other beaker, where we're going to add the other solutions as well. So now the next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to get the other graduated cylinder, and then I'm going to measure out 10 milliliters of my sodium chloride solution. So I'm going to go ahead and start adding it. Okay, so let's get closer. And our 10 milliliters of our sodium chloride solution, I'm going to go ahead and add them to our beaker. And then the last addition, we're going to measure out our glucose solution. And so we're going to go ahead and measure out 10 milliliters. Of our sugar solution. All right, and we got our 10 milliliters there of our glucose solution. You can see 10 milliliters. We're going to pour it into our mixture beaker, the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get our, I'm gonna put everything back. And then, so this is our mixture. And the next thing we're gonna go is get our dialysis solution. I'm sorry, get our dialysis tubing. And this is where it's located, it's in water. And then what I'm gonna do now is remove the tubing, make a knot, add 20 milliliters using the funnel, okay? And then tie the top, and then we're gonna place it in a 250 milliliter beaker, and then we're gonna submerge it in water, and then I'm gonna take the first reading of all those three, okay? So let's get that ready. Okay, we went ahead and opened the other side. We're gonna go ahead and add our 20 milliliters of our mixture. We're gonna get our funnel. We're gonna find our opening here. Oh, come on. Does not want to cooperate, huh? There we go. All right, and as we open it, now we're gonna get our 20 milliliters of our mixture. And just go ahead and put it on our container where we're gonna submerge our stuff. All right. And so those are our 20 milliliters. And then if you notice, I gave myself enough amount. So we're gonna go ahead and tie now the other end. Whoops. See my success in tying the knots here. Give myself enough slack. Whoops, come on now. All right, let's go, pressure. Okay. My goodness gracious, man. After a lot of trying and working out, all we gotta do now is tying it from both ends. We're gonna kind of rinse it and we're gonna set it in our container here, and then we're gonna go ahead and completely submerge it in our deionized water. Okay, and as we completely submerge it, let's see if I can submerge it completely. There you go. And then once we completely submerge it, The next thing that we have to do is we're gonna get a test of a solution. So now we need 3 test tubes. Okay, so then now that we have completely submerged our dialysis tubing, as you can see, hopefully, right? Hopefully. I'm not recording all whack. We're gonna measure out 15 milliliters of water. And then from this here on out, we're gonna go ahead and pipette out. Yeah. Go ahead and pipette out so that we get our 15. And we are at 15. And so now we're gonna continue and keep this for about 30 minutes. So we're gonna go ahead and set our timer for 30 minutes. And now we're gonna just kind of wait and test it after those 30 minutes. But now that we have our 15 milliliter solution, the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and add our, we're gonna test it in 3 different containers like we did right here. And we have all our, let's go back over here. Let's get our glucose determinant, right? And so remember that here in this one, we're gonna put our Benedict solution so that we can test our solutions in a bit. So again, we have our precipitation that happened with silver nitrate and sodium chloride. So remember, we're gonna use, again, silver nitrate to determine the chloride ion. We're gonna use iodine to determine the starch in the solution, and we're gonna determine the amount of glucose, or that the glucose is present with the Benedict solution, okay? And we also gotta heat it up. So the water bath, I currently have it going on. I'm just gonna turn it up so that it can get to the boiling effect. And then we're gonna set up our 3 test tubes. Okay, so the next thing that we're gonna do is, initially we had measured out our 15 milliliters, right, of our dialysis tubing mixture right here. And so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put it into a small beaker. Yeah, this is a small one. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna distribute this, this solution, 5 milliliters, into test tubes. And so I'm gonna get 3 other test tubes. And as I get 3 test tubes, we're gonna do the 3 different tests, right? We're gonna test for our starch, we're gonna test for the silver nitrate, and we're gonna test for the glucose. Okay, so I'll go ahead and evenly, right? So we'll measure out the first one and then kind of eyeball the next one, right? So let's measure the first one out. We got a graduated cylinder. We want 5 milliliters. You can just go ahead and measure out all of them if you like. So we got the first one. We're gonna put it in our first test tube. And like I said, we're gonna do each individual test after initially dunking our dialysis tube. A little bit more. And we got our 5 milliliters. Let's go ahead and put in our second one. Alright, and then the last one. Let's see if we've and there we go. We got our 5 milliliters. Gonna put in our last test tube, and like I said, we're gonna do the following 3 tests, right? So more or less, we got our test tubes going on, and we're gonna do our 3 tests. As you can see, we got our 3 test tubes with our initial solution immediately. What we're gonna do is we're gonna test it first by adding a couple of drops, right? So let's go ahead and put this one over here in the corner. Let's put this over here. Let's bring up the iodine, whoops. And we're gonna test the iodine first, initially, right? So iodine solution. And what we're looking for is for it to turn, remember, blue, right? And so as we add a couple of drops, right? Not much going on. Nope. And so as we add another one, let's focus in. Nope, nothing really going on. So let's go ahead and close our iodine. Let's go ahead and add our silver nitrate drop. So that's for this one. So that's at 0, right, initially. And so let's go ahead and add our silver nitrate. I'm gonna add a couple of drops. And see if there are any. Well, it got cloudy, but that's about it. We see no precipitate. Get a lot, I got a little bit cloudy, right? And let's go ahead and try our last solution, right? We're gonna go ahead and measure out, I'm assuming we're gonna measure out 3 milliliters of our Benedict solution. And we already have our 3 milliliter standard. So we're gonna get our Benedict Benedict's test tube. And so as you get it, we're gonna measure out using our standard, remember, of water. We're gonna do about 3 mLs. Gonna go ahead and place it into our beaker. Once we have our solution of Benedict's, we're gonna go ahead and add it to our mixture. And then we're gonna apply it to our boiling water bath, right? So here we have our solution. The next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna put it in our boiling water bath, and we're gonna heat up for approximately 5 minutes to determine if we get that nice little yellow color that we got over here. All right, so 5 minutes, we'll come back and check it out and see what's up. After our 5 minutes, you can see no hint, right? It's still clear. We were expecting a yellowish color in comparison to what we got for our standard. So definitely it's still bluish in there. So no glucose, right? So we're gonna go ahead and remove it from the heat. And so as I removed it from the heat, you can tell that, like again, still kind of blue, so therefore no glucose present. And then for our silver nitrate addition, it did get cloudy. As you can see right there. Nice and cloudy. So maybe some sodium, some chloride ion went through. And then of course, our starch solution, when we added it in, we did not see any blue, right? So the starch did not go through, nor the glucose in the dialysis paper. We're still waiting. We're at about 12 minutes in. I'm sorry, more than 15 minutes in. We just need about 13 more minutes, and then we'll go ahead and take our next sample and determine the presence of those 3 constituents, okay? After the 30 minutes are done, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna measure out the outside. Again, we're gonna pour out 15 milliliters of the solution outside of the dialysis bag into a small beaker and then divide that into 15. So again, we're gonna measure out 15 milliliters of this stuff. Okay, came really close. And then I'll pipette the rest of the way. And so I'll pipette enough to be at about 15. I think we're good there. And so as you can see, hopefully, at about 15 milliliters, we're gonna put it into our beaker. And so this is after 30 minutes, the contents outside of it. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna get 3 beakers now. I'm sorry, 3 test tubes. And then based on those 3 test tubes, we're gonna determine again these tests that we talked about. So I'm gonna get 3 test tubes. And as I get these 3 test tubes, whoops, go ahead and get proper handle. We're gonna do our 3 test. We're gonna do our iodine test. We're gonna do also our silver nitrate test, and then we're gonna do our Benedict's test. So then once we, what we gotta do now is evenly add 5 milliliters of our outside contents after 30 minutes. And so we're gonna go ahead and measure out 5 milliliters, and we're gonna distribute those 5 mLs into our, okay, so those are about 5 milliliters. Here, let me see. Hopefully you can see. 5 milliliters. We're gonna put it into our first test tube. Go ahead and move this over here. So first test tube, 5 milliliters. We're gonna get a second test tube, measure out another 5. Woo. Right on the money. Again, the glove test, right? So we're gonna go ahead and add our contents to our test tube. And then we're gonna go to the next one and make our final addition. We're gonna add our 3 tests, hopefully. And that's it, 5 milliliters. We're gonna go ahead and add it to our test tube. And once we add it to our test tube, you can see roughly that all our heights are about the same, okay? For our 3 test tubes, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna first introduce the iodine and make our iodine test. And let me go ahead and zoom in on this one. It's not allowing me. Give me a second. I'm gonna get some iodine. Let me zoom it in for you. Okay, as I add it, no color change. I'll add a few more drops so that hopefully you can see. There is no change whatsoever. So, no starch present. Next, we're gonna go ahead and add our silver nitrate into our middle contents. So again, these are after 30 minutes. We're gonna add a few droplets. Do you see some fogginess again? Excuse me. And those are some fogginess too. This once I added my silver nitrate, so we'll put our contents over there. I have my boiling water bath over there, and so all I'm gonna do now is add my Benedict solution. So let me go ahead and get it. As I get the Benedict solution, remember we have our test tube already ready. I'm gonna go ahead and add our Benedict solution. Now go ahead and approximately about 3 mLs, right? And we're gonna add it to our test tube with the outside contents of our solution. Okay, now that I added my Benedict solution, now we're gonna go over to our bath, and we're gonna put it into the boiling water bath for about 5 minutes. All right, so as you can see, we placed our test tube
in our boiling water bath. And so we'll go ahead and wait for about 5 minutes to see what happens after heating it up with our Benedict solution as well as our contents from outside of the dialysis bag. So after 5 minutes, we noticed that after it being in the boiling water bath, it's still blue. It is not our standard that we are looking for, the yellowish. So if you compare it side to side, like I said, it's still blue. So that means there are no glucose present in the outside part of the dialysis container.
The next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna cut the contents. So I have my dialysis tube here, and what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut it open and I'm gonna pour it into my beaker. And then once I pour it into my beaker, let me get a different beaker actually. Once I pour it into the beaker, pour it into this beaker. Whoops. Once we pour it into the beaker, what we're gonna do is measure out 15 milliliters. So we're gonna go ahead and cut our contents of our dialysis bag. And let me go ahead. I don't want to mess this up. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and eliminate, lost a little bit. So we got all of our contents here. Well, most of our contents, right? Lost a little bit. No shame in the game. So then the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to measure out 15 milliliters into our container here. So we're going to measure out about 15 milliliters. And then the remaining content. And let's go ahead and pipette the rest of the way. And so we'll grab a pipette, and all we gotta do is a little bit, and we're gonna distribute our 15 milliliters. Oh, I still have some dialysis tubing there. And all right, so then the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna get 3 beakers, and we're gonna measure out of our 3 beakers. We're gonna run it through the filter. We're gonna get 3 test tubes again, and based on those 3 test tubes, we're gonna do the same test on the inside contents, right? So 3 test tubes again. Whoops, not that one, that one's dirty. Let's go ahead and put this over here in our dirty container. Dirty spot. We got another test tube. This one's good. So we're gonna measure out. We're gonna get a beaker, and as we get a beaker, in this beaker we're gonna drop our contents, which is our 15 mLs. And once we drop our contents, now we're gonna measure out our 5 milliliters and test the inside contents. All right. Okay, measured out 5 mLs, put in our first test tube. Okay, so remember that this is the inside content, the dialysis tubing, after being submerged around water for 30 minutes. So measure 5 more mils, put in another test tube, and then we're gonna fill up our last test tube. All right. and there we go. All right, so we're gonna do the following test, right? Again.
All right, so we're gonna conduct our test. Let's go ahead and move my Benedict solution over here. My standard. Actually, no, let's go ahead. My standard, my Benedict solution beaker. And okay, so as you can see here, what we're gonna do is we're gonna get our iodine. We're gonna do our iodine test for the inside contents, right after being submerged. The dialysis tubing being submerged in about, what is it, 30 minutes? So we're gonna add and check out. And as you can see, this one is turning blue. So definitely starch present inside the contents, nice and blue little color based on our iodine test. Again, let me go ahead and zoom it in so that you all can see. We'll zoom and we'll add a couple of more drops. So again, starch present using the iodine test in our inside our contents of a dialysis tubing. Now we're gonna go ahead and do our inside contents using silver nitrate now. And so let's go ahead and zoom out. Woo! We'll zoom out. Make my addition. Maybe you shouldn't be doing this with one hand, right? And so we'll add our contents. We added about 3 drops, and that's as many drops that we needed. And as you can see, definitely some precipitate forming. We got really white solution, especially on the top. We'll go ahead and add another couple of drops so that you can see in a zoomed in fashion. And as soon as I add it, we'll move it from the top. And if you can see from the top, you'll notice those globules of white stuff. We got a nice little film of blueness, right? For our starch. Sexy. We got our precipitation going on. See there, faux zoomed in. And then the last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna add our Benedict solution. So as we add our Benedict solution, give me 1 second, let me
As I refilled my Benedict solution, we're gonna measure out a certain amount, about 3 mLs. We're gonna use our water as our standard again. Whoops, add a little bit more, making it all nice and exciting, right? We're gonna go ahead and add our contents to our, again, the contents of what was inside the dialysis bag and being submerged in distilled water for about 30 minutes. And so now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and move over to our water bath. So as you can see, we're gonna submerge our substance in the water bath again. And we're gonna wait for about 5 minutes and then come back and check it out and hopefully and compare our results to our standard. Okay, after 5 minutes, as you can see, we got a nice little brown color, right? So that means that we do have some of that glucose present, and I mean, in comparison, right, probably not as concentrated, right? But we do have some glucose in there. And so now all we're gonna do is take it out and then compare all our 3, right? The next thing we're gonna do is fold our filter paper for us so that we can go ahead and do part C. And so we have to fold our filter paper in half and then half again. And I'm gonna suggest another half. Why? Because our filter is, our funnel, I'm sorry, is a little bit smaller on the small side. So we might even be able to do another half. Okay, and so then the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and set down our filter, add a little bit of water so that we can adhere the filter paper to our funnel. Okay. We're gonna go ahead and do the last part of it, Okay, and pretty much here is to see if we have anything that doesn't go through the filter. So as we have our funnel, we could have definitely cut our filter paper in half. Trying to speed the process here, right? So we got our funnel. We're gonna add a little bit of water so that we can adhere a little bit of the funnel. Perfect. And so the last thing that we're gonna do is we have our last content, right? It asks for 15 milliliters, but there's no way in hell you're gonna get 15 milliliters when they initially only tell you to pour in 20 milliliters and then you test 15 of it in the previous part. So therefore, whatever we have left, that's what we're gonna work with. So we're gonna go ahead and put our substance through the filter, and we're just gonna let it filter out and sit for a while, and then once it filters out, then we're gonna go ahead and test our contents of whatever's left over. Okay, as a small little setup just so that I don't have to hold the filter. And so here I use the triangle, and probably this is probably not the best way to do it, but it's doing the job. And so what we're gonna do now is just wait for that filtrate, to go through, and then we'll test the contents of the filtrate, and then we'll also determine what was left kind of behind in that filter paper. Okay, so this will be part C. We'll do all three tests again in just a second. All right, so the last thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna as you can see, our filtrate is already out, and we'll go ahead and check out right now the contents of the dry filter. This is all our filtrate, and as you notice, it is a lot clearer than what initially went in. And so unfortunately, we're not going to have the ability to distribute 5 mLs into each container. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and distribute only 2 milliliters to each of these test tubes. I got some smaller test tubes, and we're gonna do the same test. And then there probably is some leftover content, but it is a white filter, so it'll be a little difficult to identify until it actually dries. So let's go ahead and do our measurements of our 2 milliliter content. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and measure our 2 milliliters and place into our test tubes. And so that's 2 milliliters of our filtrate. We're gonna go ahead and add to our first test tube, and then we're gonna go through all the tests again. Hopefully we have enough for all three. Yeah, I think we should. All right, so this one we'll go ahead and add to our other test tube, just so that we have enough of a sample. And then we'll go ahead and add it to our final. We'll just add directly. There's no reason for me to measure it out. There's no more left. Like I said, it's kind of hard to get out 15 milliliters when they initially only get you 20. So now that I measured out all our contents, we're gonna go through and determine, right, our 3 tests again. So our first one's gonna be the iodine test. So let me go ahead and get you closer. And so as we get closer, we're gonna go ahead and add some droplets. And we added a few drops. No contents of starch. Right. No blue film, like how we had in the last one, I'm sorry. And a few more drops. No color change. So then let's go to the other one. Let's go to our silver nitrate solution now. And add our drops. Ooh, nice. Sexy precipitate formation right there. It seems like there's a lot, actually. Right? And then our final addition, right? So now we already have our, I had already measured out my contents of my Benedict solution. So we'll go ahead and add it to our test tube. We'll add a little bit more. And then we'll go ahead and start heating up and see in our bath to see if there's any sugar present. All right, so then we're just gonna go ahead and place our Benedict solution with the filtrate into our boiling bath, wait about 5 minutes, and then test what happens, see what happens. After the 5 minutes, if you notice and you see our test tube, there was some glucose present, so some of that glucose did go through our filter paper. So that means the remaining solutions that were inside that filtrate was glucose and of course the chloride ion. And so if you notice here, as we go back, we will see that here the filtrate, right, that was left over from once we went through the filter paper, the remaining stuff that was inside that solution was going to be some glucose, and of course how we said our precipitation from our sodium chloride, our chloride ion precipitate. And if you look at the starch, there was no starch left in that filtrate. So the remaining solution here, there's some white stuff in your filter paper, and that white stuff that is in the filter paper is going to be your starch. Okay. And we can see if the starch was remaining and was left behind. Let's go ahead and just add 1 drop of the iodine. In our remaining container. See if we can touch it. As we, whoops, let me go ahead and